anti-war protest that gets out of hand, or Donald Trump enthusiasm that gets out of hand. Speech is not easily contained. And if you really are sincere about allowing them to have free speech, you got to be prepared for them to make you uncomfortable. And I got to play devil's advocate. You're inconsistent. You say you want free speech, but then when the speech gets uncomfortable, first of all, people have a right to say that they don't want to do business with Israel if they don't want to do business with Israel. But when they gather in large numbers in the presence of Jewish students and faculty and are vituperative and over-the-top expressive in how they want you to know that they don't want to do business with them, they're in your face shouting at you as a Jewish person when you know that there's anti-Jewish enmity lingering around the edges of these people's speech. You don't want to go to that university, certainly don't want to support that university. You feel like you're a less than person within that environment. I can understand that. The words, quote, from the river to the sea, close quote, which you have to look at every time you walk past a certain office door and which is hurtful to you. And you're saying people can say that they mean different things by that, like democracy or peace or legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people. But at bottom, it really means destruction of the state of Israel. So the analogy I want to give is the words, all lives matter, because all lives do matter. But those words, all lives matter, came to mean for a lot of people, Black lives don't matter, because the spirit that was brought to saying those words, all lives matter, was in reaction to the assertion, Black lives matter. Hello there, everybody. Glenn Loury here. This is The Glenn Show. Glenn Loury. I'm Merton Stoltz, professor of the social sciences at Brown University and John Paulson Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute. And I'm with Benjamin Fleury-Steiner, who's professor of sociology at the University of Delaware, director of graduate studies in that department, and author of many books, and someone whom I've known for a long time since I discovered his book, Juror Stories of Death, way back when I was in my anti-mass incarceration phase. But Benjamin has other books. He has a book about guys dying from AIDS inside of prison, a book about the inadequate response to the needs of veterans who have served their country and whatnot. He's a prolific critic and sociologist writing about American social policy. And I'm happy to have him on the show. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks so much, Glenn. You know, it's a true honor to be here. A great admirer of you. And I really look forward to this discussion. You know, this is a difficult discussion, I know, for many. And as someone who is born and raised Jewish, but not a practicing Jew, and not married to a Jewish woman, we did not raise our children Jewish. Nonetheless, a topic that has become that has impacted me in ways that I didn't think it would. And you know, with October 7th, 2023, really being just such a game changer for me.
Well, okay, that's the topic. The topic is anti-Semitism in the wake of October 7th, American campuses. I mean, the boycott, divest, and sanction movement, the reaction to the conflict in Gaza. And you have the personal connection that you've identified. That wasn't what we were initially going to talk about, but it has somehow become the subject. So
we could talk about a lot of things.
Okay. What do you think is the most important thing to say about that?
Well, I think, you know, just from a very, and some may accuse me of the presentist fallacy, but what I have observed to be still challenging for a lot of people, particularly those that have been, you know, very critical of Israel, is the events of October 7th, 2023. You know, which were so horrific in their scale. You know, when you think about, and as academics, we have to remind our students of scale of jurisdiction to understand the kinds of questions we're actually asking and the information we want to share, right? And so the country of Israel is the size of New Jersey. I mean, it's about, 9 million people. And on that day, the terrorist attacks resulted in the death of 1,200 now, I believe, Israeli citizens. And the deaths were horrific. And, it's just, this is indisputable, right? Yet, in broaching the discussion, it seems as though that that can't really be a part of it. Or if you talk about that, you've hit some sort of third rail defense of the apartheid state of Israel. Some describe it, and for me, it's like I want to have a productive discussion with interlocutors who are quote unquote pro-Palestinian. But how do we even get there if we can't begin by acknowledging that we're really not having the discussion, at least to the, I think, in the explosive way that we're having it, if the events of October 7th never happened. So as a result of that, and observing on my own campus, which certainly the response was not like John's at Columbia and others, but there was...
You mean not as intense, not as vitriolic?
Right.
Okay.
But there was vitriol and there was reaction in ways that were shocking to me, at least to the extent that the mobilization of students on our campus and some faculty members, again, who were presenting the debate as one of, Israel, genocide, all of the things, arguably, and I think there's a useful debate, and about before October, the events of October 7th. But
I want to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Ben, I hear you. Okay. October 7th was horrific. Actually, I was out with my friend Larry Kotlikoff, as it happens. He's a Jewish guy. He was the best man at my wedding. I've known him for 30 years. We were out at dinner. It was October 7th, which is my wedding anniversary.
Wow.
My lovely wife, Lawan, and I, we were married in 2017. So it was 6 years that we are together, that we were celebrating. And Larry and his wife, Bridget, and we were out at dinner. And Larry's looking at his phone. He said, oh, man. Something is going down. And then, of course, we went on and had the dinner. We didn't stay on the phone, but we subsequently learned that something very, very, very significant had gone down. Now, these people who you're saying haven't appreciated the severity of that are saying, okay, that was horrific. I mean, most of them are saying that, okay? I mean, they're not like, I know some are, but most are not like, oh, that was not an atrocious deed. They're saying it falls within the context of something.
Right.
An occupation, domination, resistance. They have their different theories, but I'm just saying, I just want to ask you a question.
I do have one clarification, because it's not just the horrificness of October 7th. It's this. No matter who the president of Israel was, the prime minister at the time, no matter what country, if an event like that happened, there would be a military response. And there would be a justifiable military response too, right? So it's not just the horrors, it's the justified response from the military. But I think, obviously, and I tend to be empathetic to the arguments, no question, that are critical of what happened next. But I have found it to be a bit maddening that folks may acknowledge how horrific it is, but they don't see that a military response by Israel is justifiable.
I don't think anybody could maintain credibly that a sovereign state, Israel, so attacked, would not respond militarily. That's absurd on many different levels. I mean, first of all, it invites future attack to not respond. Secondly, there's a domestic political imperative that there be action. What government would stand if it didn't respond? So that's not right. The question is the character of response. Okay, so in a word, Gaza has been reduced to rubble, and there's a lot of dead bodies. Now, how many is too many, and how much rubble is too much rubble? So that hospital, this compound, that situation, this, et cetera. And then accidents happen, and stuff happens. It's war. So you end up with a lot of dead bodies. And people are saying about the dead bodies. And this is what I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you about how you calibrate the relativity of the impact. You said, let us not overlook the impact of October 7th, and I want not to overlook it. But what about the impact of Gaza being reduced to rubble?
Yeah.
That's 2 million people.
I think it's absolutely horrific. And frankly, when I see the mass graves, the images from the Holocaust come to mind. I mean, I think it is absolutely horrific, and I think that the scale has been so extreme. You know, at the same time, it's just the terrain. It is so dense. You know, I'm not sure how productive it is at this point, where folks, I think maybe that are closer to my point of view, talk about how Hamas used the Palestinian people as human shields. Because these are people, right? I mean, they're mothers, their fathers, their children. I mean, they're being killed and by Israeli bombs, and hospitals being destroyed. So it's absolutely horrific. And so I absolutely empathize with those that have been critical of the response. One thing I would add as a caveat that I would be hypocritical if I didn't is that in another life, like you, I've read Late Admissions. I had a very different path to academia. You know, I haven't met too many people that had the path that I had, and that was as a criminal justice major at Northeastern that wanted to go into law enforcement and then enlisted in the Army Reserve. And then it was in a military police unit that was activated for the first Operation Desert Storm, right? And on the one hand, I think that it was justifiable going there. And I was very, very much vitriolic probably at that time about going. But when you look at what we did to Iraq, I mean, the number of innocent people killed is just staggering. It's horrific. And so I would be a hypocrite if I didn't say something about these other conflagrations, you know, that we're all too aware of with Gulf War I and then Iraqi freedom, that the level of destruction and innocent lives lost is just horrific and indefensible. And I would say the same for Israel. But here's the more difficult question. How do we have a productive discussion about the day after, about the need for, again, I would take off the table the argument that the state of Israel should be dissolved. And I know there are people that believe that and argue that. And I think that to me it's horrific to even consider what that even means, right? But at the same time, I want to have more productive discussion about the day after, about the what happens if there's a peace, which again, I would also be very dubious that any kind of peace will hold. I want to try to make sense, Glenn, of like, you know, what are the terms of the debate to think about a future, you know, that doesn't involve more mass graves?
Okay, Ben, I'm interrupting you now because I want to bring some order to the conversation. I mean, there's so many different things going on. So one theater of discussion is campuses in the United States and activism that has anti-Semitic flavor to it, and it's certainly anti-Zionist flavor to it, and that's critical of Israel. That's one thing. Another thing is about the day after, about the conflict. I was born in 1948, Ben. You know what I'm saying? I'm 75, going to be 76 years old, man.
I'm 53, so I'm a spring chicken.
Israel has been at war my entire life.
Yeah.
So, you say you can't imagine Israel not existing. I certainly don't want to imagine Israel not existing, but I do want to take note of the fact that Israel has been at war my entire life.
Yeah.
So this is not going away. This is a festering, deep, profound fissure that we're confronting here. Some of those people waving those protest signs on the anti-Israel thing are saying they want one person, one vote between the river and the sea. They're basically saying democracy, quote unquote. I understand the arguments against that. I'm not trying to propose it. I'm not proposing it, everybody. Okay, I'm not proposing it. Is that the end of Israel? Is that the same thing as wiping out the Jews?
That's a great question. And actually, interestingly, before becoming the director of graduate studies, the graduate students' offices had that in the window from the river to the sea with with the Palestinian flag. So
in your face.
So I emailed before I started as director. Actually, no, I was director. I emailed some of the grad students, the leaders of the grad student council, and I said, that sign, I've looked at it now this semester, and it's really painful to me seeing it. And I would love to have a discussion about it, right? And here's something that I've come to understand, and I think probably others have too, and that is my graduate students actually do not see it as the destruction of Israel, nor anti-Semitic. For them, it is like a slogan about peace, a slogan about bringing humanity to the folks of Palestine. It's not about anti-Jewish hatred to my graduate students, and I shared with them, my perspective, which is inescapably that those words are about the destruction of Israel. And, as I learned, they were a part of the far right in Israel in terms of their view of endless war and destruction of Palestine, one state Israel. So, but more painful to me is understanding that those words were forged in an obviously anti-Jewish sentiment, right? I mean, going back to, I think, the Muslim Brotherhood, and then, onwards, to the Hamas or factions of Hamas and some of these other extremist terrorist groups. So I think still espouse that meaning behind it. So to me, like, the kind of like contortions of mind one has to take to understand those words as anything different, it's really difficult for me personally. At the same time, again, that in talking to them, it helped me to understand that that's not for them what it means.
Okay, so I want to give you an analogy and see how you react. You're talking about the words, quote, from the river to the sea, close quote, which you have to look at every time you walk past a certain office door, and which is hurtful to you. And you're saying people can say that they mean different things by that, like democracy or peace or legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people, but at bottom, it really means the destruction of the state of Israel. So the analogy I want to give is the words, all lives matter. All lives matter. Because all lives do matter. But those words, all lives matter, came to mean for a lot of people, Black lives don't matter.
Yeah.
Because the spirit that was brought to saying those words, all lives matter, was in reaction to the assertion, Black lives matter.
Yeah.
People were saying what it really means. And there's no way you can use those words, all lives matter, and have it not mean Black lives don't matter. This feels to me to be something like that. Like the words have taken on a life of their own and have a meaning that's somehow independent of the intent of the person who speaks them. Because I can see an argument, I want to know how you react to this, from a certain point of view, which says the de facto state that governs the lives of people between the river and the sea is Greater Israel. It's Israel and the occupation. Some people are citizens, and some of them are Palestinian Arabs who are citizens of the state of Israel. Other people are occupied. They're not citizens. And that's a police state on them. What I want is this person's speech is all those people to have equal political rights. That would be legitimate, fair outcome. And they're going to use words like apartheid and all that. And I'm not trying to provoke you. I'm just trying to say that's what they might mean by saying from the river to the sea. From the river to the sea, I want everybody to have the same political rights. There's a de facto state, and yet some people are set aside, so to speak, and not, they're militarily occupied. Now, that's a legitimate position. A person could take that position and try to defend that position. There's nothing anti-Jewish about that position.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where my graduate students are. It's end the occupation. It's genuine freedom, democracy for all Palestinian people. And I mean, that's an aspiration for me that I hope. I mean, Yitzhak Rabin is like such a great hero to me, but it took tremendous compromise. And then, of course, he was assassinated. So I agree that and I'm actually somewhat sympathetic to that argument. At the same time, though, that I think there are obviously many people in Hamas, some of the other factions of these groups that are terrorist in their beliefs. It does mean for them the destruction of Israel. So I am open to the argument, and I understand it. And I think occupation, to be totally honest, as a small d Democrat, capital I independent for a long time, I was very critical of Netanyahu and the occupation. I thought I think the occupation went too far and has gone too far. I wish there could be something beyond that in the future. I would love to see that. So I actually share that, but I cannot personally agree that it is a shared belief by those who were involved, obviously, in the events of October 7th. And also, it was horrific seeing people dancing in the streets around the world after it. I mean, where's the basic sense of human dignity and humanity after such a horrific event? But of course, it's rooted in a long history, one you're more familiar with than I am, because this war has gone on and on and on endlessly. There's been dancing in the streets after slaughtering of Israelis.
I think what some of my Jewish friends would say is it's Jew hatred. That's what the dancing in the street is about. They're celebrating the killing of Jews.
I believe that. I mean, I don't understand how, again, so that's right. Like, how do you, I want to hear the argument as to why that isn't Jew hatred and espousing a belief in the destruction of Israel. I'm open to the argument. I don't think there is any reasonable argument that's that somehow doesn't mean that.
Yeah. I'm commenting as an outsider because I'm not Jewish. I'm not embedded within the conflict. The question of, survival, life and death, you have enemies, and then you have to kill them, and then you have to demonize them. And that could go in both directions, actually.
Definitely.
And at the end of the day, we got a smoldering heap of dead bodies. And is there a cosmic justice? Is there a righteousness that's above this conflict? So the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Nakba, dispossession, the scattering of these people, they're refugees. Again, I understand that this is a complicated history. I'm not going to try to sum it up in one word, but just to say that opens up this fissure that creates this, who are those 2.5 million people? How did they get there? Where did they come from? So they talk about the doctrines in the school books of the kids in Gaza about hating Jews, and I don't doubt it for a minute. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that they are indoctrinating their kids to hate Jews. And I think a fair-minded person could conclude, based on the totality of the destruction of Gaza, that there might have insinuated itself a small amount of anti-Palestinian hatred and enmity in the actions of some of the Israeli actors who wrought that destruction. That's certainly hard to rule it out. Hard to rule it out.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say one thing, Glenn, like as a graduate student, maybe even in college, but as a graduate student, so many heated arguments with family members who to me were Islamophobic. And it was like just all Arabs, they want to kill us. And so, I mean, I think that is also a big challenge on the other side, you know, I mean, for Jews. Maybe it's generational. I don't know. But
let me ask you.
I'm certainly not a believer that all Palestinians espouse the radical jihadist beliefs of these factions of Hamas and some of these other terrorist organizations. And yeah, again, I have to be an idealist with the hope that there can be. I mean, I have memories of Rabin and Palestinian Americans who are getting ready to move back, right? I mean, it was, I don't know how close it was, but it was a lot closer than any other time I can remember. And gosh, I would love to see that. But yeah, I mean, if family members were here now, they would be cutting me off and saying, that will never happen. And they want to kill all the Jews, us and them, you know, kinds of narratives that we can't have any productive discussions about this topic, right?
Let's talk about the boycott, divest, and sanction.
Yes,
You're very concerned about that. Yeah. Tell me, you know, what are you doing? What's going on at your campus? How are you trying to respond to that set of initiatives?
Yeah, so that was a concern on our campus and many campuses. And I think when you look at BDS, so let's just begin with my concern about BDS. Okay.
Can you just explain? I mean, I know everybody knows, but can you just explain what it is?
Boycott, divest, and sanctions towards Israel. And it really, I think, got its teeth. There was an organization in the U.S. in 2005 that called for academic boycott, like purging of Israeli scholars, of teachings about, I mean, the kind of stuff, as someone also who's been active in the AEUP, our chapter on campus around academic freedom issues. Academic boycotts to me are indefensible, right?
Let me go on the record agreeing with you. I think it's outrageous. I mean, not to mention the fact that, I mean, a big chunk of the economics profession would be gone if you cut out the Israeli economists. I would miss them. But it's so anti-intellectual in the extreme.
And it's taken root, right? I mean, the American Anthropological Association voted and has now implemented a boycott of all Israeli anthropologists. They can no longer attend those meetings. They're no longer
that's
affiliated.
Outrageous.
I mean,
that's outrageous.
So, I mean, and it's happening, I think, even more aggressively in Europe and like other countries. Like this is not just some fear. This is happening.
You're isolating. I mean, you're trying to say there's a moral sanction you're not going to do business with, you're not going to honor, you're not going to include, you know, like with the South African situation or with the Soviets, not the Soviets, the Russians with the war in Ukraine, stuff like that. So that's what that is. But I'm in agreement with you that cutting off intellectual ties between universities as an expression of your political revulsion at a government's activities is entirely inappropriate. But if I said, I don't want to patronize a certain set of businesses because I don't like what they stand for, I don't like the way they do business, I'm not sure I see that there's a particular moral problem with that. People are free to do that.
That's your choice. You know, and for me, and why we got involved in sending messages to the university leadership of our concerns about BDS at UD, for me personally, I think students have the right to protest and call for that, you know, in theory. But, you know, I think that they have the right. Of course.
So what's the problem? What's the problem?
The problem is what we've come to understand happens in a lot of, you know, in places. particularly the UC system, right? And that is these protests become really not, really hostile, alienating, threatening. I know more about activities online by protesters attacking Jewish students. I mean, the climate becomes very, very hostile, and we saw it. And so that's where a huge concern for me, and why I wanted to get involved in my university. I truly believe that if that kind of protest continues, Jewish students will leave the University of Delaware. I know for a fact too that parents of new undergrads at our Blue and Gold days are asking those questions. I'm concerned about the safety of my kid coming to this school, and the response to that too is, in many ways, not a First Amendment issue anymore, right? I mean, it's rules and regulations of the university to protect the safety. So I am a supporter of free speech and expression, but when it crosses over into threats and hostilities, which we've seen that it has, the university has to get involved. And I'm not sure if my message and my colleagues' message led them to get involved, but they did get involved. And they allowed the students to march, and students from other universities came and they marched, and they were there till 11 o'clock at night, several hundred of them, but it was peaceful. And then, and then it ended. And if they did it again, that would be, I think they have that right. I think BDS, when it leads to this relentless attack, anti-Israel and threatening, even though I think it's probably true. I've heard your colleague, who's I respect tremendously from Brown, who's the Holocaust historian, Bartov, Omer
Bartov.
Yeah,
thank you.
I have so much respect for him.
Oh, I've had him on the show, actually.
Yeah, I loved the episode.
But wait a minute, Ben. I can't let you filibuster. I gotta say something.
But he just said though that he went out to the encampments, and what he experienced was a lot of the dialogue. The experience was not anti-Semitic. It was peaceful. Yeah. It was that hope. So I'm not totally convinced that blocking expression of speech, even in the encampment context, necessarily means a hostile campus. But I think there's enough evidence that and enough concern expressed by Jewish students, their parents, all across this country, faculty, that those concerns are serious and they're warranted. And as we said at the beginning of the discussion, this is going to happen again.
Okay, hold on. I got to play devil's advocate. I'm gonna push back. You're inconsistent. You say you don't. You say you want free speech, but then when the speech gets uncomfortable,
I don't know if it's uncomfortable. It's more.
Well, hold on.
Threatening.
Well, one thing at a time. First of all, people have a right to say that they don't want to do business with Israel if they don't want to do business with Israel. But when they gather in large numbers in the presence of Jewish students and faculty and are vituperative and over-the-top expressive in how they want you to know that they don't want to do business with me, they're in your face, shouting at you. As a Jewish person, when you know that there's anti-Jewish enmity lingering around the edges of these people's speech, you don't want to go to that university. You certainly don't want to support that university. You feel like you're a less than person within that environment. I can understand that. I mean, if back during the days when segregation was breaking down, the few black students on the mostly white campuses had to face mobs of white students shouting in their face, "You Negroes don't belong here. You Negroes don't belong here." Of course, that would be intolerable. And you would expect the university to step in and protect those Negroes, quote unquote Negroes. Likewise, here, you would expect the university to be sensitive to, aware of, responsive to the impact upon Jewish students from that kind of thing. But is, there's a war going on, and a lot of people have very strong feelings about what's happening. They are identifying with the Palestinians who are being buried under rubble. You want them to have free speech. You think you can make that stay nice, stay all polite with the I's dotted and the T's crossed. Nobody's going to get on the edge a little bit in that kind of a conversation. You can't have free speech, and again, you could give many different examples. Anti-war protests that gets out of hand, or Donald Trump enthusiasm that gets out of hand. Speech is not easily contained. And if you really are sincere about allowing them to have free speech, you got to be prepared for them to make you uncomfortable. Read Nazis marching in Skokie in front of Holocaust survivors. So I'm not sure you can have it both ways, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I am being inconsistent. and this is the crux of the matter for me. I think this is one that has been really challenging, really challenging. And I have erred on the side of, the messiness that is and has always been anti-war protests, civil rights protests. I mean, on and on, right? It's messy. And with this war, the protests are going to happen, and they're going to be messy. I'm having a very difficult time with this one, Glenn, in all honesty. And by my actions have demonstrated that. My actions have demonstrated that I'm not comfortable with the BDS constant presence on the campus. Now, if it was a lawsuit, there's probably a good chance they would be protected. Although we're seeing some horrific things, right, with the police being mobilized and beating up kids and pulling them off the campus. Like, that's the other side of this that also horrifies. But when push comes to shove, I'm deeply concerned about that messiness. And I think that's also informed, too, by inescapably the history, right, of these actions against Jews. Not only this leading to muzzling, but then, boycotts and just a horrific kind of situation all around the world, for Jews that is rooted in, that history. So this is why I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, but also to be someone who is really strong First Amendment and was involved with our union and has spoken out against, previously, even those who've been critical of Israel being, terminated from positions. In some of those instances, I think it's a demonstration of anti-free speech, no question.
What did you think of the incident at Columbia University recently where 3 assistant deans or whatever texting back and forth amongst each other during a ceremony or program having to do with Israel-Gaza, and apparently made use of anti-Semitic tropes by, for example, overemphasizing the influence of donor contributions to the university and other kind of stereotypes that were anti-Jewish. And they were fired or suspended from their portfolio of responsibilities, including the dean of the college, who was implicated, although apparently not disciplined in the same extent or whatever. You know the incident I'm talking about?
Yeah. I think for me, they are officials and leaders of the university, and the fact that they were using such ignorant anti-Semitic remarks, I lose all faith in them as leaders of the university. I mean,
the way we know about what was in those texts is that somebody apparently photographed the screen of one of the participants in the chain of communications. I don't know. I assume had a camera going over the shoulder or something like that. But you were speaking about free speech. So now a person texting, they think privately to somebody else is subject to, career ruin because they, that's not exactly free speech. I agree with you. I want to go on the record saying I agree that the sentiments expressed, they were inappropriate to someone of managerial responsibility in the university.
That's the thing, though, about free speech, right? I mean, it's a legitimate qualifier, isn't it? That the speakers were part of the managerial, administrative, the leaders of the university.
Who thought they were communicating privately, but I agree with the general premise. Inappropriate for them to have those attitudes if they're responsible for overseeing the university's function.
Yeah, and again, it goes to also my feelings, and you've spoken at length about the termination of the former president of Harvard, and what disappointed me so much about that presentation was like the lack of compassion for the Jewish students, which goes back to my original point. It's such a compassion deficit. Like so many people are hurting. Show some empathy as a leader, and it's so disappointing that leaders where a lot of people are really hurting and scared and everything else because of the events of October 7th and the fallout. And they need to be reassured that all human beings on this campus will be treated with dignity. And it's abhorrent on both, that this kind of treatment happens. I mean, I'm not going to be a university president in this lifetime, but it seems to me if I was in a leadership role, showing empathy and respecting the dignity of the whole student body in a show some spirit and emotion. And we didn't get that, and that I found that to be really disappointing. And I find, these text messages, it's appalling. It's that they espouse these or these anti-Semitic beliefs and these terms that are just so hateful as the leaders of the university. It's just incredibly disappointing.
I want to tell people about how it is that I came to know about Benjamin Fleury-Steiner. It was because I was working on my lectures that I gave at Stanford in 2007, the Tanner Lectures on Human Values, and was writing and thinking a lot about incarceration, which I did for years and years during the aughts and early 2010s. And I have a small book out there, Race, Incarceration, and American Values, that was based on those lectures. But in any case, so I'm trying to acquaint myself with this literature, and the death penalty is one of the themes, and the racial disparity in the death penalty and the Baldus study and all that. And Northeastern is one of the centers of research, of primary research, documentary and survey and study. And there's this book, Jurors' Stories of Death, written by this guy, Benjamin Fleury-Steiner, that asks the question, how is it that juries can persuade themselves to actually take a life? And they theorizing that they have first to come to see the subject of their deliberation is not quite fully human, and then factoring in the way in which race and racial tropes and stereotypes figure into the jury's deliberations, but based on detailed examination of the interviews of hundreds of jurors who had been participating in death penalty cases. And I was just blown away by this book. So thank you very much, Ben, for Jurors' Stories of Death, which really gave me an awful lot to think about in terms of racial stigma, in terms of the way in which the subtle social meanings of race, derogatory meanings that we inherit from the history of slavery and racial domination, insinuate themselves into ongoing decisions and to the adverse effect of African Americans. And, you got that when you nailed it, man.
I really appreciate the words. And, Glenn, a lot of what was helpful for me, on the one hand, how to grapple with these narratives, these, many jurors using these us versus them racist narratives, on the one hand, but how to do it in a way would be productive empirically. And your book, The Anatomy of Racial Inequality, was hugely influential because it helped me to understand Goffman. So if you're a sociologist, he's one of the giants in that book, Stigma. And your ability and so much of your scholarship to me is inspiring because you are an economist, but you are taking from many different intellectual traditions and weaving them into really eloquent and powerful arguments. And that's precisely what you did in that book with Goffman and the concept of racial stigma. And it really,
I want people to know. I want my editors to know also that the book of mine is is The Anatomy of Racial Inequality. That's Harvard University Press, 2002. And the book of Irving Goffman's is Stigma: Notes on the Management of Spoiled Identity, which I think is like 1962 or 1964, something like that. But it's Irving Goffman, the great Irving Goffman, Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, Irving Goffman. And yeah, we're talking sociology here.
And the other thing I'll say, Glenn, too, is that, again, I'm not saying this objectively and honestly. When you're an author, you get a book, like you're looking forward to the blurbs, and you're hoping certain people will blurb, right? And Juror Stories of Death. I wish I had it with me so I could read Glenn's blurb, but it's so eloquent. I mean, I learned, in many ways, I think I then reached out to Glenn about his ideas about racial community, because he talked about how the book points to something bigger. And that is, like, how do we even constitute ourselves as a multiracial community? And that's, that was, to me, such a profound insight to have on the book, beyond just, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful blurbs, but a lot of it's kind of backslappery. That's such an eloquent, it's great. And you need it. It feels good to be validated by your colleagues, but rarely do you get validated by someone you look up to as a scholar, and you learn something from the blurb, and you're like, he understood more about the implications of this project than I did. That this goes beyond the death penalty. And we had a very brief email exchange about racial community, and I think you brought Bowling Alone, Robert
Putnam,
the great Robert Putnam. Like, you brought him into the email conversation, and we had a little bit of a dialogue, but we're busy and nothing materialized with it. But it was like it was kind of invigorating, because it really made me think too, like. And that's also part of my scholarship that is continued to evolve, is to want to go beyond more than just documenting the wreckage. And Juror Stories of Death clearly is a documentation of the wreckage of an institution, I think.
I want to expound on something for a minute. And it's about the social meaning of race. And I do so because we live in an age, as you know, where racelessness and colorblindness is very much the thing of the day. And people advocating, resigning from race, retiring race, and so on, and the deep structural meanings of race. And I mean, I first started thinking in this way from reading Orlando Patterson's Slavery and Social Death, where he does this thing of theorizing slavery. And he says it's the permanent violent domination of natally alienated and generally dishonored human beings. Now, natal alienation is the master's property claim intercedes between the generations. So the mother, the child, the husband, the wife, the master's in there. So they're alienated natally. But generally dishonored is that the social meaning of race has a derogatory, less than, subordinate quality to it. And this gets reflected in the academy, it gets reflected in the press, it gets reflected in the popular culture, it gets reflected in a lot of different ways. And the idea is that by declaring race is over, time out, we're not going to do race anymore, doesn't actually eviscerate or eradicate that residue, that inheritance. So it's not carefully thought through, I don't think. And it becomes this kind of thing that people do. Wow, I'm going to be colorblind. You believe in race. You believe in something that's not real, that's a fiction. And I'm just trying to stay in touch with the historical and cultural environment in which I'm embedded.
Yeah, and I know Coleman Hughes has written about it. And of course, my colleague, Eduardo Benio Silva, has written the Colorblind Racism book. I don't know, it's a 6th edition or so. But I think part of the good faith scholarship, and I think probably Coleman Hughes, I think it is in good faith, to the extent that at the same time that he is making the argument and bringing forth this history. He's wanting to have more productive dialogue. He's wanting to have something more positive, potentially, right? Rather than just blaming victims, showing how bad the system is. I mean, we need that kind of research, and that's a big part of my research. But we also need the next step, you know? What can we do with this understanding of just saying race doesn't exist or whatever colorblind tropes people evoke not to talk about racism? I really think the question, the so what question, is really important. And I appreciate scholars that will try to engage with the so what. And we know it's not easy, but I really appreciate that part of it. Because I think the problem is if you don't, right, then it's just things are, it's a doomsday narrative. We're just doomed. And there's a lot of doom. And there's a lot that's not pretty.
That kind of brings us back to what we started with in this conversation, doesn't it?
But we have to hope. I mean, and I've taken that from you, and I think Late Admissions, which has been my my summer reading, like what is so remarkable about this memoir is the honesty, the candor. I love the artful writing, the introduction. This is the narrative I'm going to present to you. And then the conclusion, if I have presented the narrative, I'm hoping there'll be some more understanding beyond, I think you say, labeling me as a narcissist. Well, to me, what's really profound about this is, number one, you have convinced me that you are not a narcissist, and I have never thought that about you. But I also think there's a lot of power and empathy that comes out of a book like this too, right? That in spite of all of the trials and tribulations of your life, you were more than those things. You were more than the addiction and the adultery and all of the mistakes and problems, as most of us as flawed human beings have, despite many wanting to present themselves as if they don't. I find it so refreshing and as a scholar for you and to write a book like this. It's inspiring. It's so inspiring. It's something also I think I teach incarcerated students as part of something called the Inside Out Prison Exchange. And one of the mantras there is, you're more than your crime. You're more than your pet. There's possibilities, and it begins with changing your mind and seeing a different future, different possibilities. That's constantly evolving. And I think that message comes through, and it's not easy, obviously, to reading about it. It's painful in so many ways. I just found it to be remarkable that you had the courage to write it, and to me to convey that message, that we need to have more, treat people regardless of their past with dignity, possibly compassion, seeing the better angels in people. We need more of that in this polarized, divided society that we're in ever more. More now than I can think of ever before. And I feel like, even though you talk about your intellectual journey as, liberal and then moving away, and it's Confessions of Black Conservative, that to me has nothing. The deeper message of this book to me is, myself, and now long respected elite scholar, have wounds, and the past can be very troubling, and problematic and difficult, to say the least. But that there's the possibility in all of us to change. I just found it to be remarkable, and I applaud you. I'll say the other thing too, Glenn, is having your son on here too, then to talk about it. I thought that was one of the greatest episodes of the Glenn Show in a lot of ways. I mean, for one of the things I loved about it was the lack of sentimentality. You know, your son continued to kind of dig his heels in a bit, and but at the same time, there was a mutual respect there, of the honesty and the sharing between father and son. And also, the title of, I think, that episode was "Your Behavior That Harmed Your Former Wife," and
you didn't always treat mom so well, or something like that.
Always treat mom so well. I mean, I take it as deeply courageous and inspiring, and an example for more people who have strong political convictions and want to just constantly judging people and looking to just dehumanize and undignify people because they have different political beliefs, digging up the past as a weapon against a person. I mean, this book and your project and that episode to me was so inspiring. And yeah, I mean, I think it's part of my own development, again, in assessing my own experience to scholarship, which is not comparable. And I don't know if I have a memoir in me, but it's very different. Again, it's just very different starting off as an enlisted person in the military with a life I was going to be a police officer. That was it. I mean, that was.
I want to say something as we get to the end of the hour here. I mean, first of all, thank you for reading my book so closely. Thank you for the wonderful, wonderful words of praise that you've offered. Thanks for noticing what happened, the miraculous thing that happened between my son and I at this podcast when we discussed the book and his mother and our lives together. So thank you. I want to underscore a couple of things. One of them is about compassion and forgiveness. And, I remember from my days in the anti-incarceration movement, I mean, that was a key thing. You're not what you did. You're more than that. There's a humanity that transcends that. I remember that from my involvement with the Christian organization, Prison Fellowship Ministries, which was a similar kind of spirit of, people are not human refuse. You don't throw them on a dung heap of human debris. You don't discard human beings. There's always, that's why a life without the possibility of parole is such a terrible sentence.
Yeah.
I mean, it precludes the possibility of that you could revise your assessment of the individual, et cetera. So
we have time enough. Do we have time enough for me to just share one anecdote about life without parole?
Sure. Let me finish what I was saying, though. So I said there were two things, and one of them was about forgiveness, and the other one is about political partisanship.
Yeah.
And the idea of forgiving somebody for liking Donald Trump or for liking Joe Biden or for liking climate change or for or whatever, that we not be so isolated from each other that we can't transcend the difference that we might have over a particular policy issue. And that you found both of those to some degree reflected in my book is just a wonderful thing to me. It just makes me very happy.
Yeah. And again, this book should be so widely read because it just embodies that the whole where we need to. It's a microcosm for the possibilities of the kind of community that we want. We can very strongly disagree on policy beliefs and agree to disagree. But we can treat each other with dignity and not stigmatize and label based on our, I just think that there are huge lessons for me that go beyond even your own miraculous transformation. And but the one thing I want to say about life without parole, so at Inside Out, to become an Inside Out instructor, you spend a day at the prison, and the program, check it out to learn more. But the program began at Temple University, but it began with discussions between a professor and her students and folks that were incarcerated. And the discussions were so amazing between the outside students and the inside students that she decided, it took many years, to have a class where you bring in half university students and half incarcerated students and have a college class. And part of that training At the time, it was the old Graterford prison when I did the training. I spent like 2 full days there. And the instructors, the ones who were evaluating our pedagogy, were serving life without parole. And,
Wow.
and I will never forget just how poignant and transformed they were by being a part of the program and insightful. And I remember I was saying something about, I was doing a thing about the war on drugs, and someone had them go around the circle and share something, and someone said something about when they think about the war on drugs, they think about just how it destroyed, it's done so much harm to families. And I just kept going. And then this member of the think tank stopped the extra activity. And he said, Ben, ask him what he means by that. Get him to share what he actually means by that. And so I said, okay, well, help us to understand what you meant by that. And then he shared something about his own family. And that very little thing has really informed my pedagogy ever since. Like, to want to hear, to help me to understand. That came from someone who was doing life without parole, So,
good story.
So I just had to share that because it's something.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I got to call it a day. My name is Glenn Loury. This is The Glenn Show. You've tuned into it. I have been with Benjamin Fleury-Steiner, who's professor of sociology at the University of Delaware. We've had a great chat about all manner of things: Israel, Gaza, anti-Semitism, boycott, divest, and sanction, but also about his great book, Jurors' Stories of Death, about our mutual interest in incarceration. And God bless him, about my memoir, Late Admissions, Confessions of a Black Conservative, which he has in his hand and which everybody should get their hands on. So, I don't think I mentioned that the Manhattan Institute of Policy Research in New York City sponsors The Glenn Show. It does, and I'm very grateful for that. So thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Glenn. It was a real pleasure.